views, opinions, and positions expressed on this radio program are those of the speakers, authors, or other contributors. This broadcast is intended for entertainment purposes only.
Consciousness is an amorphous and expanding entity.
Realize that you are in a cultural hypnosis.
We have been systematically put into a state of unconsciousness so that we cannot see.
I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like
what
that.
we are part of and what we are experiencing, though, that is changing.
When one is able to repeatedly step into the purity and hardened space of genuine and heightened awareness, miracles manifest. Conscious evolution becomes inevitable, and the revelations to one's spirit becomes revolutionary within the simplicity of its own essence. Awakening then becomes of it to where the destination of such a path, when one has answered to the calling, unfolds to reveal the ripening of one's universal truths. The book of positive light, Remembrance of the Heart.
And now, here is your host for Quantum Mindfulness Radio, Joel Ayala Ayupanya.
And so, for the intentions of this show will be geared to guiding you, the listener, into the variable realms of the subconsciousness, the unknown of things, realms of which have been withheld from our awareness and in our consciousness for way far too long. And we bring to this sacred space, this think tank of sorts, this field tank of sorts, many and several methodologies for self-help, integrative medicine, healing, ancient and newer philosophies, alternative ways of perceiving and interpreting our world today, and into bringing upon this stage, this platform of sorts, on awakening paradigms, some of the most profound of our forerunners, leaders, and trailblazers in the industry of self-help, quantum theory, and inspiration, and in this case, independent filmmaking. And so for my guest for tonight's show is nonetheless far from the very intentions of what this show is all about. And for those of you of whom have read my book, or at least have had the opportunity to picking it up and enjoying the very front cover of my book, well, my guest for tonight's show and her very image was portrayed on the very front cover of my book, The Book of Positive Light. When I had taken that image of her and her daughter, as the slow sunsetting sun began to dwindle out into the distance along Brush Creek in Adams County, Ohio, at one of the most mysterious, but yet one of the most celebrated and highly regarded ancient sites in the world, the Great Serpent Mound of Adams County, Ohio. And yes, when I had first taken that image of her and her daughter, I knew from within my heart that this image was going to be the very front cover of this book. And so I have with me tonight, for tonight's broadcast, my dear and wonderful friend, Mai Kim Dang, an inspiration herself, a writer, a poet, a philosopher of sorts, a lover of many spiritual movements and belief systems, a world traveler, and an independent film director, of which she has directed and collaboratively produced some of the most eye-opening and compellingly thought-producing productions created within the independent movie industry. So thank you, Mai Kim. Kimmy, please welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm very, very happy that you welcomed me in such a warm and delightful way. Thank you. It really was touching.
And Kimmy, you've been gone for a significant period of time, coming in and out of the United States and going back to Ethiopia, where you're pretty much, for the most part, your heart remains. You're in the United States now, trying to collect funds and some fundraising for many of your projects that you're doing overseas. And I just applaud you for the work that you're doing out there and sending the messages of inspiration, love, and hope to the masses. So for our listenership, if you could, for our audience members, if you could describe just briefly about yourself.
Well, I guess I would describe myself first as, a human being that is striving to serve the Most High and trying to have, to create a spiritual life, healthy spiritual life for myself, my daughter, and my home. And I think that's where everything first starts for me, is who I am as a human being, wanting to improve myself, wanting to be more patient. And the thing that Ethiopia taught me more than anything was that time reveals truths that you are not aware of at the time of living during that period of time. So when I was in Ethiopia, what I thought was a reality really wasn't. And when I came home, I really saw the country for all that, the value that it had. All those things that I didn't necessarily see when I was there. I saw some of them. When I returned, I understood the gift that I had been given. And so to, honor that treasure, I want to go back and I want to do really good things, not as a person, giving generosity, but sharing things in the earth. One of the most important projects for me is not only making my documentary into feature films, but also to build a library film center in a city, a small village actually in Ethiopia known as Tereta. A very beautiful place, very kind and generous, and some of the most lovely people I've ever met in my entire life. And it is named after a man named Luca, who treated me like a granddaughter, and my host grandmother from when I was an exchange student in Japan. So it's named Fumie Luca. That's the name of the center. So I guess I'll let you ask me another question because I might have went off track right there.
well, not necessarily. Oh, yeah, definitely. And I'm a writer myself, and I can often just exclaim things and just broadcast a lot of that inner knowledge and wisdom and just go off on a tangent. And that's what us writers do. We're thinkers, we're philosophers in many ways. And from just knowing you from the very beginning of my journey and the awakening of sorts, and just the launching pad of the creative process, and then knowing you that you were very much a part of that beginning journey for me. Just your inspiration alone of your knowledge, your inspiration, and just the great amount of ideas that were just culminating through your spirit. I would have to say that you were pretty much, for the most part, a huge inspiration to everything that what I'm doing today. And so I just wanted to again applaud you for being a part of the awakening process for me. It was something.
I have to thank you for that. I remember those days. Trust me, I remember them. They're very sweet and interesting because I was very temperamental then. I still am, but
right. Well, I mean, it's all an evolution. Back then as well, I was going through a divorce myself, and I was for the most part looking for myself, for self, and just making a comparison of everything that you have gone through in your journey. It's for the most part a parallel of what I was going through, but you took it another step exponentially, which required a great deal of faith. Of course, you from what I've known from you, just the brilliance that you are, and your intellect, and being a Fulbright scholar, and not a lot of people are awarded with that level of prominence, and for you to take that to another level and to take your knowledge and wisdom outside of the States, and then bringing forth that inspiration to Ethiopia, amongst many other places that you visited. It's just been, again, an inspiration for me. So if you could tell me just the beginnings of how that all began for you, and how it felt, and just a little bit of the struggles, too, in collaboration with the beginnings of your journey.
Okay, I'll start with how I came to know Ethiopia. Prior to going to Africa, I hadn't ever been drawn to the continent. I had a very deep interest in Guatemala and South America and Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Cuba. Those are the places that really were like in my mind, that really lit me up. And I wanted to take an anthropology course, and every semester I would go to the anthropology department and inquire, do you have your Maori course? Do you have, whatever course it was that I was interested in? They never had it. So finally, one semester, there was this class that said Ethiopia, and I said, I'm taking it. I was so excited to see something there. And from there, at some point, I decided to apply for a Fulbright, and I asked my anthropology professor for a recommendation to kind of steer me in the direction of a place that he thought would be good for me to travel to and to do research. Knowing that I am an independent, I was studying filmmaking, and I would be working as an independent filmmaker, and he said, 100% you have to go to Ethiopia. And I took his advice. I mean, when I go through some old emails, it was very interesting, the countries that, I was considering going to. Like, Ethiopia was there, I think, but it wasn't really on the top of the list. I think it was just randomly put there because I had taken a class on Ethiopia. So when I first landed in the country, it was a very exciting time for me. One reason is the connection to my daughter. My daughter is half Ethiopian. Her father is part Oromo and part Amhara, which are two tribes there. Two of the largest. Oromo is like one of the largest tribes, and Amhara is a tribe that has a lot of political, power, or has had political power in the past. So because of that, I had not an experience of just research, but I had an experience of being part of a family, knowing the country in a much more informal way. So after I left, after doing a research for 10 months, and I was just basically getting a feel. How did filmmakers feel, watching the films, looking at the content, trying to be supportive of filmmakers making films. So, for instance, if I was aware of a competition for films, then I would let people know, and I would act as someone to help facilitate them applying for that competition, just trying to be active and present and being the link between people's desires and the reality that they wanted for their film career. But I left, came back to the U.S. and had my daughter math coach. And when I returned to Ethiopia, I was working for a short time at a liberal arts college, teaching public speaking and English for a day. That was only for one day. And then I started working at a film festival. And so the experience that was difficult was some of the bureaucracy, some of the corruption, which at the time seemed to me, it was, I think, it seemed much more extensive. Not extensive, but it seemed much more traumatizing than it actually was, because I hadn't really faced those things in my past as an artist in the U.S. I was in college, a very sheltered existence in college, working in the arts. And then there I was in Africa, and I was dealing with companies that were kind of funneling money to other things besides the projects that they were supposed to, and kind of taking money from students, and it was very difficult for me as an artist to witness this, especially being an industry that is so exhausting to see money being, stolen and to be seeing people's dreams being taken, really hurt me. I guess it really hurt me in a deep way. So I came back. The reason I came back to the U.S. was because I know I needed funds. If something was going to get done in the way that I wanted it to be done, I would have to raise funds. So I have to. Oh, go ahead. I think you have a question.
Oh, and just thinking about the type of fundraising that you're about to do, and in many ways that you have contributed to my intellect as far as different ways to fundraise is just a crowdfund for the most part. And just from the many different authors, directors, and just many different creators that we have out there in the industry of creating books and even film, crowdfunding has been a huge component to raising money. And in the sense of what I'm doing right now with this new radio station that I'm starting to develop and have been developing, crowdfunding has been a huge component to bringing that money out there. And again, it brings out to the whole philosophy and spiritual intonation of bringing together community and unity. And I believe from the experiences that you have acquired from Ethiopia alone, and many other different aspects of your world travels, wouldn't you say that there's a significant component of unity and community that you can see out there in outside countries in comparison to what you see in the United States?
Can you repeat that last part, as you said, in comparison to the United States?
Yeah, it's pretty much just a question, just relaying out, whether you see a difference in how people live their life out there in Ethiopia in comparison to here, whether there's more community, a sense of community, you think, out there in Ethiopia?
I think that in some ways they may have stronger. They're very patriotic, very connected to one another, but they also are very disconnected in other ways of giving charity, and it's very complicated. It's very complicated for me. The culture is very different than anything I experienced. I wouldn't say that they're more connected as community at all. I lived in Gehr area of Ethiopia, which is in the capital, and the neighbors, for the most part, didn't know one another from one block to the next. They kind of worked hard and just came to their homes, and that was that. And I lived in a community in the old airport area, and those were a lot of foreign people, and they had gates around their homes. So, I feel like there's the way that life happens in Ethiopia is that a lot of things are the natural life of the Ethiopians is very flowing. It's very organic. It's very rich. It's very lovely at the roots. But the culture that's being transported there from the diaspora often and from international communities is very it kind of isolates the local person. It kind of tears the local person away from having full access to their country.
Right.
So somebody who was born and raised in Ethiopia might not feel comfortable going to an art event, because a lot of the art events are held at the French Culture Institute, the Italian Culture Institute, and so there's a certain class of people, meaning their economic background, meaning their nationality, which doesn't make the local person necessarily feel welcome. And even the hours that they have performances are ones that are at night, which many local people do not drive. There are people who drive, but having a car is not something the average person can afford in Ethiopia. So a lot of teachers I know that work in the university did not own a car. They call it public transportation, not because of the desire to, but because that was what they could afford to do. So the events would often be at night, which would cut off a lot of the population from even attendance. So I think that they have a lot of things to overcome, but they are very, very clear on holding onto their culture, and they're very clear on holding onto their language, even though a part of society is very determined to let go of their culture and to forego their language. The majority, I would say, sees the value in recognizing where they came from and honoring where they came from. So I think when I went there the first time, I was just experiencing it as a person who really had little knowledge of Ethiopia. I had mainly studied the history, and I was reading about the Afar tribe and the Danakil Depression and just very historical things dealing with geography. But I didn't really know the country at all. I knew it through my now ex-husband and his family and the small group of friends that I had near me. And the second time I went, I lived very much so as a... Sorry, there's a going by. I lived very much as a local person. So I experienced not having water, not having light, being stranded at night, waiting for one taxi with 100 people in the dark.
Wow.
No, I mean,
amazing.
Literally,
Right.
Yeah, so I mean, I experienced life for what it was, just...
It's very humbling, wouldn't you say?
I think that at the time, yeah, I guess you could say that, because, and I don't know if I would say humbling. I think that what happened when I experienced that, it taught me a great deal of patience, afterwards. Like, now when I'm back in the U.S., I don't really get upset easily about anything. I'm always enraged by anger, when things happen, when people commit crimes and things of that nature, and they're not, there's no repercussions because of their wealth, things of that nature. Just like a recent incident, there was an assault that happened against me in Rocky River, and there was no repercussions to the person that did it. And it just happened recently, and it was very exhausting because I was in Ethiopia, and I told people our country has these values, and I was overly patriotic at times. I was overly patriotic, and I said, there is fairness, there is regulation. And then I was recently assaulted, and basically the prosecutor of Rocky River had just told me, tomorrow's a new day. So, there is no action taken against the person. And so it showed me that being a spiritual person, I believe that I'm Muslim. I adopted Islam when I was 18 years old, and I've been practicing for the last 17 years. And having faith and believing in God, I know that every action people do, they'll receive. In the Quran is very interesting, because if you do good, you receive 10-fold for that action. But if you do evil, you only receive the same equal punishment. So I believe that every action is witnessed. So even when things are difficult, I have faith. And when I was in Ethiopia, when things were very difficult, I remember one time I was crying, and I was walking by the river. I used to walk by a particular river, and I said, God, I don't know why I'm here, but I know you want me here, but I just don't know why. And now that I'm standing here walking, talking with you, I can say why, because I can help the country in so many ways that I haven't seen done. Because I went there as an artist, and I'm going back as an artist. And my intention is only to, I say when you say humble, I think this is the part where humility and being humble comes in. I go back as a partner in the country, wanting to, help kids. For instance, I started a program, and we're just in its infancy, but we're trying to informally provide jobs and mentorship to young people to retain them so they don't go to Saudi Arabia and they don't go to Lebanon and they don't go to many of these Middle Eastern countries where often the girls are, raped and other very tragic things happen to them. Of course, it's not the case in every situation, but it's prevalent enough that when a lot of Saudi Arabia had to send back a lot of the women, because there was a lot of protests, so they sent back a lot of the women to Ethiopia, and a lot of those girls were pregnant. And so, you can see what was happening. And everybody knows it, but little had been done. So I remember, I can tell you one clear memory that I had, because I have so many memories of being Ethiopian.
I could imagine. Just before the actual broadcast and the pre-recording of the show, you mentioned that you're going to potentially create a book of your experiences, not necessarily of the past 35 years, but just that very intimated moments and memories in Ethiopia. So that's going to be something that's going to a work in progress, or is there a particular time frame in which you might be doing something on paper?
It's going to happen soon, and actually, I had fallen in love with a man named Hayala Mikonen from Tigray region, and we were engaged. And when I came back to the U.S., the relationship was just strained, and cultural differences, and just issues within relationships caused the engagement to fracture. And a lot of feelings still emerged from that, because I remember he had taken me to Mekelle, which is in the northern region where a lot of the famine had happened many, many decades ago. And I had met his father, and it was such a beautiful, peaceful city. And it was very different than the capital. There, it was so organized and so accommodating. And I remember people were so honest. I remember being in a taxi and someone said, "This is your change." And I know in Addis, when you're a foreign person, sometimes, not all the time, but there's a great percentage of times where you're told the wrong thing. You're given an exorbitant price. Somebody charges you 1,000 times more than the local. But I remember being in Mekelle, and it was a very beautiful city, and a city I would like to go back to. And I also went to a city that's very special to Muslims, Nagash. It's where some of the Prophet Muhammad's family or companions, I'm not sure if his family or companions, had refuge there. And so that, the country is very special to me. I didn't have a chance to travel all over because I was very selfish. I wanted to focus on my work, and I didn't take the time. I didn't have always the resources, but when I did have the resources, I tried to always put it into my work, because that's what happens when you're making film. Whenever you have money, it goes into the work. So if you have $5,000, $10,000, and you have a choice to travel to Lalibela or to Axum or to Gander, these are places that are very well traveled by tourists. You tend not to go because you said, I can hire this many people and I can do this work. So I think when I return, I would like to see more of the country. I think for me going back, I want to experience another side of Ethiopia. So I've experienced the side when I came and I didn't have any knowledge of it. Then
Absolutely,
I experienced the side of being with the locals.
Right.
But now it's like a time to go back and be relaxed and create and paint, which I want to start painting. And I'm not by far excellent at it, but I want to paint, and I've wanted to paint since I was in college. And I want to write poetry and make film. And I want to, I think this is the part maybe where where you're at.
Before you get into that, and there's so much I want to say about the creative process, and you're doing so much creation, not only on the outside of things, but that I know just knowing you, there's a lot of stuff brewing within inside of you, and I'm the same way, and I can see there's definitely a huge parallel between us as far as the creative process. But I would love to get into that in the second half of the show. But with only less than 3 minutes left remaining in the first half of our broadcast before we transition into our station identification break, can we please provide for our listeners your contact information, your websites, or any of your up-and-coming work that you would like for our listeners to know?
Okay, you can reach me at my email. That's the best way. That's dang.vindy@gmail, and I'll spell that out. That's DANG.Vindy, V as in victory, INDI@gmail. The current projects that I'm working on are 12 Bar Blues, which is a documentary researching African American people, studying African languages and African Americans who have traveled and or are anticipating travel to the continent. My 2 feature films are Getacho, which is being done with my very good and lovely friend Getacho Wasi. He's a screenwriter, and he's working on a documentary on Rastafarians as well in Ethiopia right now.
Wonderful.
And a feature film, which is my beloved treasure, Turkish Gehr, which is an Islamic moral tale about humanity and its reckoning, and God's decision whether to keep us here or not. So that's the treasure that I'm working on, and that's the biggest. That needs quite a big sum of funds. But the documentary is just a very small project. It's a mini series where I go to LA and I go to Rochester and Florida and meet different African Americans and talk to them about the spiritual connection of language and how language is transformative. And I think that's the thing that's not really being shared. The African American community has for a very long time not have had the floor nationally, and I think that it's time that changes. And it's been time, but I think this is a very good time for it to happen. But anyone interested in talking, meeting, I mean, funds are very crucial, but networking is crucial as well. So I can be reached by email, or they can even contact you if you don't mind. If they can't get hold of me, and you can reach me. I don't give out my telephone number over the air, but email, you'll reach me 100%.
Yes, I would have to say too as well, it is time. In comparison to what many other philosophers, spiritualists, authors, and people of the creative process, that they've mentioned many times on over that it is time. And so we'll talk about this in the second half of the show. And so there you have it, the inspiring and creative heart of my dear and wonderful friend, Kim Dang. My Kim Dang, philosopher, world traveler, and an inspiring and passionate independent film director for many collaborative independent films. And you can catch the very details of this intuitive conversation and interview within the archive podcast banks of Real Revolution Radio.
I've been losing sleep, dreaming about the things that we I've been praying hard, so no more counting dollars, we'll be counting stars,
Get ready and enter into the last undiscovered planet in our galaxy, the human consciousness. Take a ride with American-born autodidact and polymath, M.A. Carano, author of the highly regarded book, Asleep in the Helix, as he succeeds like few others before him in breaking down whole brain synthesis for a revolutionary new ethical philosophy, circumscribing the indispensable principles for overthrowing the forces that stand between the ego and the total realization of its highest potential. Drawing up on resources as exotic as quantum physics and chaos theory on through the outer limits of transpersonal psychology and the science of cybernetics, Asleep in the Helix amounts to nothing less than the most scientifically advanced platform for personal evolution available in print. Dr. Patel calls it scientifically articulate and intensely researched. Asleep in the Helix, Survival in the Science of Self-Realization by M.A. Carano is available in major online book retailers. Change your life and get your copy today through HollywoodBookTrailers.com.
And so welcome back, dear listeners. We are back with my dear friend, Mike Kim Dang. She is my guest here for tonight's show. Welcome back, dear friend.
Hi, I'm still here. I was anxiously waiting to get back on the air.
Right. I mean, we're just going through a commercial break. As always, we got to pay our sponsors for the most part. But Mike Kim, I mean, just a very inspiring story that you have to tell. And before we start off our second half of the broadcast, I just wanted to ask you from just the last 30 minutes that what was your inspiration and what had actually enthralled you to make that journey out to Ethiopia? A very scary move for many, but to go down there not really knowing of what to expect, but only just taking the recommendations and suggestions and advice from some people that might know of the actual anticipations in the journey to starting a potential movement, an independent film type of movement, and exposing and broadcasting what we are missing out in the very story in Ethiopia. What were your exact inspirations, and what had enthralled you to make that move to Ethiopia?
Well, I think, everyone here doesn't know me. Everyone's just getting to know me, but you knew me when I was in college, and you kind of know that I had a thirst to experience the world, and I kind of felt, which this is one thing I feel strongly about, that we each equally have access and the right to the universe. And so traveling and seeing things just seems organic to me, to go and to explore. And I think that comes with being younger too. There's less reservations, there's less fear, there's more, there's just more drive to know things and to grow. As an artist, my inspirations often have come from walking under this tree and listening to cicadas, or just observing nature, or watching old films, whether it's from Sweden or Senegal, or reading, books. And I think just having grown up being a reader, an avid reader, that it gave me a certain perspective about life, and that perspective I know now in many ways is not aligned with the kind of existence that's being lived by many, especially I would say especially in our country, because our country is a capitalistic society, and we do have access to many things, but we have so many traumas and so many hurts that are completely unnecessary, because the spiritual side is not cultivated. So I was coming from a point of just wanting to explore and not really feeling afraid of anything, and that's the beauty of youth, of being younger. Now knowing things, when I give advice, it's interesting because there's reservations. There's a young girl, and she's a very lovely girl, and she's having some issues where she's being bullied, and it's hard for me to give her advice because I don't want to say the wrong thing, because idealistically I think I tell her this and it'll solve the problem, and then I know if I tell her some other advice it might not work because she's young, and being young you see the world much differently. So I try to give advice right in the middle, so it's just enough to help her, but enough not to try to impede on her youth, because actually your youth can't be impeded on a lot of things. You have to learn by living, and I think that's one wonderful thing that happened to me in Ethiopia. I learned about many things through living. I learned about myself. I learned about my family, and when you talk about inspiration, I have to say this. In the entire world, I was given one person that has so much love and admiration for my work and supports me and is honest, and that's my mother. And as a mother now, I want to let my daughter always know that I'm that person for you. And of course, one day I hope to remarry and have add an addition to the family and have, a big family to be in. But having that one person has meant a lot. And when I was in Ethiopia, no matter what I was going through, my mom was always a reminder to me that God is with us, that Allah will help us, that you have to have faith. And we have this discussion. Part of having faith is the loss of fear, because fear actually is a barrier between you and your Creator, because it doesn't allow you to trust your Creator. So I am a very spiritual person, and as most of us living life, I've made mistakes. I don't think they're so great, but I've made things that, of course, I regret and I would do over in hindsight. But I think that's the thing that's missing, I think, in the world, is that there's a lack of tolerance for being human. And part of being human is to make mistakes, those things that help us and prepare us to be better individuals, stronger individuals, and more discerning individuals. So when I think of faith, and when I think of Islam, I think of something that is very natural. And when you see the tenets of a religion being practiced, there's no mistaking the sight of God. When people truly practice in the nature of faith, there is no conflict. There is, we have, for me, there's always this attitude of right and wrong. Clearly there's a right way. Clearly there's things that lead you on the wrong way. But with God, there is always that mercy and that forgiveness and that, it's just extreme compassion. And I think when people try to implement religion, often they subtract the elements of God, which are the most profound and needed, that is there with the Creator for us. And they give us a very stern, rigid ideology, which is completely disconnected. I always tell people one of the most freeing places for me to pray in is an open field. I feel when I am in an open field with trees and the sky and the sun, I feel God breathing everywhere around me and all these things. And who is, for someone to tell me that, that is not as sacred as, a place of worship, I don't think they have the right to say that. I think that often people try to tell you who God is when God is speaking to us all around us, all the time, in the ways that every individual on earth can understand. And it's very specialized and it's very generalized for us as human beings. So I'll have to say the inspiration is my mom, and I have to say that for my life as an adult, I feel the presence of God, and I feel that I'm constantly trying to, mend for my mistakes that I've made in, younger years, but I feel God is with me, and that I know that I'm in this profession, and it happened not the way that I thought it would, because I started out as a writer, being in competitions, writing poetry since I was a very young child, going to an arts high school, graduating from arts high school, wanting to attend Oberlin, which I didn't. I had a full scholarship to Ohio State, which I didn't take. I mean, there's all these things that happen. And I wanted to go to Hawaii, and my mom asked me to return to Cleveland, and I ended up at Cleveland State studying film. So, I mean, life, I think, is very surprising. And what you want and how you want it, they don't always come to be. But I think just preparation and being patient, that makes all the difference in the world. So I feel like at 35 years old, I always hear people talk about the young people, the millennials, and how they're shaping the world. But I think it's forgotten that there's something I read in a Buddhist text, Taoist text actually recently, that every age has something that you can't learn. Every age there's something for you to learn at that period. And I think it's very important that our society starts recognizing the complete value in every age category, and stop exploiting youth. Youth is a beautiful time, and I think that it's it's being used as a time to kind of transform young people into confused human beings instead of it being a time for them to learn and to grow and to become, these lovely people that we need in this world. Because we need people to be lovely and good. And we say it and we teach it in the U.S., but we don't see the benefit always from being lovely and good. The reward isn't always there, So I don't know. My inspiration is my mom, and I get strength from my faith. And I have my best friend. His name is Stephen Carlton Boone, and he's a film critic in New York. And I remember when I was at a really, really exhausting period, just as coming back from Ethiopia and being my engagement being broken up with my fiance and trying to be successful in a city that can be difficult to work in as an artist. He was always very much there for me, and I think there's something to that when God gives you other human beings that are beside you during your difficult times. And it's interesting when we met because you were going through a divorce. You had gone through a divorce, but I think I hadn't had the full impact of what you were going through. For me, even the way I saw you as my friend who was very energetic, who loved trying new things. And whether we were going to remembering the veterans at the church, or we were going to the synagogue, or wherever, or going to Tinko, wherever it was an adventure. And it was just actually just a lovely time of friendship for me. And I think that at the time, maybe I was selfish because maybe I didn't see that, you were going through this thing. Maybe if I had been more intuitive or I don't know, maybe I would have known. And I think that's what happens. I think I have clearer sight now. Like I feel that I pay attention to people, but now I pay more attention, because I always try to be supportive of other people. And because I know that people need to know that there are people who do things for without any benefit. I mean, it's important to know that exists. And I know it exists, and I think your show is really wonderful, because each human being is capable of so much, but yet we do so little. And I don't just blame people for not doing so much. It's really external, a lot of it. It's the external pressure. It's kind of the environment that's being created that doesn't encourage it and that doesn't always allow it. So it's like people are trying so hard for something that should be so easy,
Right.
So.
And the beauty that I see from just your experience, and I've known you for, how long has it been? Since 2009. And it's 2015 now, so 6 years. Just knowing you for the very person that you are, or were 6 years ago, and the very person that you are right now, it's completely night and day. Not to say that the very person that you were was any less, but I mean, I definitely love you for the person that you were back then, as a friend and spiritually in many aspects of the name. But just from what people read about and experience in the classroom and experience from hearsay, and like what you said before, there's no way that you can entirely experience the whole process of any wisdom acquired if you don't actually experience and embody that wisdom. And I know that you were a very spiritual person back then, as you are even more so now, but taking that knowledge and that wisdom and scripture, and through many aspects of different belief systems, and you're very much so a fan of the Judaic ways of things, not only of Islam but other different belief systems, and that always has intrigued me. And I often came from a background of one way and none the other. I was born a Catholic, and was encouraged by my Catholic upbringings to hold one truth and to embody that. But being exposed to you and what you're all about, allowed me to appreciate the many aspects of the human condition, and not just the negativities of things, but every aspect of what people believed in and have known to be true to guide their lives, such as, the guidance and the structure provided by Islam and Christianity and Catholicism and Buddhism and the Judaic traditions of things. And I got to tell you, it allowed me to take that component of what you believed in and acknowledging and respecting every belief system. I've incorporated that into my knowledge base, and that allowed me to become more respectful, to see things multidimensionally. And again, I was going through a divorce, and I was very instrumental in trying to absorb as much as I could from the lack of not absorbing all that I could within the marriage from my previous marriage. And you were definitely an outlet for me to do that. And, case in point with just putting out there on Facebook, I remember 6-7 years ago when I put it out there, hey, guess what? I'm going to be going to the Serpent Mound. And, of course, no one really knew what that was, I guess, at the time from my circle of contacts of people. But you jumped on that invitation for everybody. That invitation was an open invitation for anyone, but you in particular jumped on it. And then we took that 4-hour journey to Adams County. And that one picture that I took of the both of you and your daughter, it exemplifies your journey from the last 6 years of what it is culminating throughout the global landscape of what is required within the mindset, the awareness, the consciousness of what humanity is starting to envelop. And I believe that this is happening because of people out there who are doing exactly what you're doing, exemplifying and portraying and broadcasting your own life as an example. That very picture that I took of the both of you, I knew when I saw it for the first time, and when I presented to you, I was like, this is the cover of a book. And guess what? This is the cover of my book that I'm about to broadcast out there. And even at the time, there was like an inkling of a doubt of whether this book was actually going to get published or not, but it did. And just the amount of not so much criticism, but a lot of the applaud for having a portrait of that, symbolic of a mother. You're looking to her right, and in the background having the sunset coming in as a positive sense of light of this new era, this new movement, this new cycle of things of a sacred, divine, motherly type of feminine nature that is taking over not only the United States, but not only Ethiopia, but the rest of the world. And this is whether you know of this or not, but I've just been noticing and have been conversing with many people of whom believe that this is happening. It's the balancing out of the masculine energies of things along with the feminine, and that's the thing that I am experiencing myself. Not only portraying and broadcasting that within my own life and my books, but also embodying that wisdom too as well. That it is very important to go and embody the experience of what was taught to us spiritually within the holy text, and in your case, Islam. And so, again, I applaud you as well with the many things that you have done to doing it as an example. And not a lot of people are able to do that. And you have taken a lot of faith, a lot of courage to go and to live the life. And not a lot of people live their lives; they just settle. And so, I just want to thank you for the very person that you are. And
thank you.
And with just only a couple minutes left in our broadcast, from everything that you have portrayed to us, and just little tidbits of your own life and your own philosophies and inspirations, is there a final message, a caveat for which you would like our listeners to bring home with them?
I think that's difficult, but there are a few things that I would have to say to the audience. It's just I do believe actually that sometimes it feels like the world is kind of returning to its natural state, and that's hard for those who are used to, oppressing and benefiting from the majority. And I just want to add this. I know we only have a few minutes, but whenever I see any human being that doesn't have the resources or feel that they have the opportunities to live to their full potential, that's in my mind when I create. I'm creating because I believe that art can change the world, and sometimes when you see things happening to it, you can get frustrated and you can become confused. But talking to you actually was very good to hear your thoughts on this and to hear what you're feeling about the world, because it makes me feel like what I'm doing isn't in vain. Because sometimes I feel like I'm trying to solve really huge problems, and I'm trying to solve it with other like-minded individuals, and the problem is just overwhelming. But I make art because I believe that it has an impact. And the thing that I would say is that please support, documentarians and filmmakers, especially those of us who are coming from African American and Asian and Latino and the Middle Eastern backgrounds, as we say, the people with melanin, the people, that constitute the majority of the world, and whose voice has often, their voices have been trying to be pushed out of the universe, and you can't, because God created this, and God created it to be successful. But we need the support as artists to make this work. And I'll tell you, it makes me feel especially good when someone who is African American supports my work. It makes me feel really, really happy that someone from my ethnic background, sees the value in it and thinks that it's good and thinks that it's going to help the community to be stronger. And my work does focus on Black life and African life, and trying to connect the two. And for anyone who has a passion for those things, I really say reach out to me at dang.vindi, dang.vindi@gmail.com, and let's talk and let's meet and let's try to move this forward, because I think that language is so powerful in changing the way that we live and reconnecting to that sacredness of our ancestors, and recognizing that our ancestors do have a huge impact on who we are and the way we're living. And we may have forgotten, or we may not have forgotten, but we may not be able to reach that line. And language is there to do that. I believe that 100%. And I'm working very hard as an artist, and I love my work, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But it is difficult. So when people find it worthy to come forth and say, we support you, it means incredible. It's incredible. So that's what I would say. Just everyone, just stay united as, a civilization that we are, and keep ourselves holy, and try to manifest that.
Absolutely.
Manifest that everywhere, every day. That's all.
Yeah, and it's just exactly what you had mentioned it to be. It's very simple. It's very organic, and it is very much to do with the focus and the guidance to self. And you mentioned it many times on over, collaboratively, surprisingly enough, in the 60-minute show. But again, it's all about the energy. It's all about the flow. And you, Mike Kim, have been such a trailblazer about the flow of things and the creation of things. And you have done so within the art form of film directing and film creation. And just how you have collaboratively and elaboratively integrated your technique, and as far as your philosophies to your spiritualities to what you know in filmmaking, and then networking, and then marketing, your marketability. You are definitely an example for many of our future filmmakers to portray what is real and what is true out there that is happening within the world today. And so, again, Maikem, I thank you so much for who you are and what you do, and in your movement that you are putting out there for the many beautiful people in Ethiopia. And again, for our listeners, please do. For all of our people within the creative process and authorship and radio, talk show, podcasting, creation, and along with film directing, please, by all means, contribute as what little you can or as much as you can to our work and any fundraising or crowdfunding type of modality. For this is something that would be pennies or seeds that are planted within the ground that we should so desire to see as the fruits to elaboratively change the landscape all across the planet. And so, again, Maikem, thank you for being on our show. And again, I would love to have you on a future broadcast as well.
Yes, and I look to see you in the future. Let's have lunch.
Yes. Just like old times.
Yes, lunch. Let's have lunch. So. Yes. Okay, thank you so much, and thank you, listeners, for sharing this hour with us, and I'm really grateful for that. And so, thank you.
And so there you have it, my dear and wonderful friend and inspiration herself, a writer, a poet, a philosopher of sorts, a lover of many spiritual movements and belief systems, a world traveler, and an independent film director herself, of which she has directed and collaboratively produced some of the most eye-opening and compellingly thought-producing works within the independent movie industry. Maikem Dang. Thank you so much for being here. And until our next show, please, by all means, continue to contribute to the heightening of global consciousness, the awakening, the revolution from within. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Satnam Namaste.
I started talking long ago before they knew they were powerful. My eyes were as blind as my heart when I was 18. So lost inside the lies of being clean. It was